So, European countries ready their hospitals for war with Russia, and the Kremlin is only intensifying its disinformation attacks. We will discuss these topics right now. Hello, everyone, and welcome to YouTube channel War and Politics. My name is Sofiia Troshchuk, and it's my pleasure to introduce our guest. It's Dietmar Pichler, Disinformation analyst from Austria. Dietmar, hi, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visited Austria this week. It was such a great visit, I think. What narratives did you see on social media about it?
So first of all, unfortunately, it is not only social media. So we had, for instance, our far-right party FPÖ in the parliament, who is quite on the leading point in the elections and also in the polls. So they're a very powerful party, not part of the government, and they campaigned against the visit of President Zelensky. They claimed it is not compatible with our neutrality, which is factually not true, because as our president said, our neutrality is not political neutrality. We are allowed to have an opinion, and we are allowed to support Ukraine and to support international law. We are not only not allowed to have military bases or be part of NATO or something like that, which has nothing to do with a state visit, of course. And the same you heard on social media a lot of times. So what we always have, when there is something big happening, a big attack by Russia or some outbreak or some negotiations or a state visit, then you have a very high activity of trolling. And we have to distinguish, these are real people in some cases, so some activists or maybe even agents of influence, but also, of course, trolls and bots with very obscure profiles. And they have the same narratives they had. It's against the Austrian neutrality. I don't want to pay any more for Ukraine. And some of them had more sophisticated ideas like, yeah, look what happened before and all these old Russian narratives. But what I saw, what is really different between other occasions, that we didn't hear these complex stories so much. For my first analysis, at least, it was always only two narratives, neutrality and we don't want to pay for Ukraine. So it's different because usually the trolls have a very wide variety of Russian narratives. I don't know why this is not in that extent the case now. And I would also like to highlight that they use quick reactions on Facebook. So they make this angry smile. And we see that in almost all posting of big Austrian media, these reactions are the majority. And it's not public opinion, not at all, even if we have huge problems with distorted realities here, but not to that extent. So what they do, these trolls, is they manipulate the public opinion. So not only that they try to manipulate what the public should think, but they also try to show a manipulated picture. So if you're a politician, you think, okay, nobody supports this policy. And this is the same thing they did in 2014.
So, yeah, unfortunately, we know that there are a large number of pro-Russian politicians in Europe. What propaganda do they most often spread about Ukraine?
Yeah, first of all, it's not only what they say, it's also what they leave out, what they don't mention. So they say we cannot have a leader of a nation at war in Austria. But they don't say that this leader is the defender. And you can also say the victim of the war, because there is an attacker, there is a criminal, and this is the Russian Federation. And there is a defender, which is something completely different. And we need to distinguish this. And what they always love to do is that they demonize Ukraine, of course, like I mentioned before, and nothing changed in the last 10 years. It's always the same tale. They demonize Ukraine in order so we are less supportive. But what they, when they try to manipulate discourse, they even mock about Bucha. It's so terrible. It's really disgusting. The only good thing about the far right is that they are not subtle. They don't do it the intellectual way, and everybody knows. I mean, not everybody, but most of the people understand what they are about and what their positions are. With the left-wing, so-called Putin-Versteher or Russland-Versteher, we have much more it's much more difficult to expose them because they use more subtle narratives. They speak about peace. They say both sides need to come to an end and violence is always bad. And they are not really supportive of Ukraine defending itself. And this is at least as problematic because if you don't see the Russian narrative, then it works much better than if it's obvious and stupid and disgusting, of course. But, when we play, there is a reason that you see in RT in Spain or in Germany, you have a completely different program than if you watch Solovyov, because it would not work. Yeah, people would be disgusted, most of them. But with these subtle narratives about peace and we should all come to an agreement. And I also heard that things like we should give Vienna as a negotiation place, so that we can build trust. And I think how you can build trust with a genocidal imperialistic regime that wants to destroy its neighbor, that doesn't allow the existence. So with this kind of rhetoric, we somehow we distort reality again. And I think that these sentences are most harmful.
I have one extra question. Which narratives about so-called negotiations do you see on social media, in real life, the most?
So it's a mix. It's a soup, but it's not a soup I would like to eat. Yeah, it's a very ugly and nasty soup that they created, a very dirty dish. The first thing is they tell a couple of lies about 2014 and they say, yeah, but there were a lot of provocations. Then they speak about NATO expansion. So all these things that aim to make your mind think, okay, somehow Russia had its reasons. Yeah, so that's the first stupidity. And then we have ideas like, give Russia the territories, then they will stop, they don't want more. So the biggest problem we have in this narrative, it's not only about that they ignore what occupation means, all the crimes against the people in occupation. I myself, I was 2 times in Ukraine since the full-scale invasion. I met people who were in the torture chambers. It's awful, and nobody should live under these conditions. But what they also ignore is that the people were forcibly recruited to fight against more Western territories. So they ignore. We have a denial of Russian imperialism, and the worst thing that I think really makes me angry is when they say, yeah, but Ukraine can be neutral and then the war will be over. So they again push this narrative that Russia only invaded because of NATO. Not even Russia itself claims this. They have the other narrative about Donbass, which is of course also 180-degree reality distortion, but they have something else, and they have also their history lessons. I mean, history, by Putin, where they deny the right to exist for independent Ukraine. So they ignore all of this when they say it was only because of NATO. And what is even worse about it, that they somehow justify it because they say, yeah, it's not okay an invasion, but they did it for security interests. They mix it, for instance, with the situation we have now between Israel and Iran, where Iran says we want to destroy Israel since decades, and they're working obviously on so not that I have an opinion about it, but it's completely different. It's not comparable, of course. And when you have a discourse like that, and there was during the press conference when President Zelensky was in Vienna, I couldn't believe what I heard. There was a journalist in 2025, and now asking President Zelensky, what do you think about our neutrality? And wouldn't be neutrality a solution that could work for Ukraine? Yeah? And I think that this question implies that the invasion was because of NATO, and which is not true. So you see, we have a dynamics, and to be honest, I'm more more worried about these dynamics of the discourse, which is not fact-based, than about some fake pictures or some trolls, because we have real people, journalists, so-called intellectuals, professors spreading that narratives.
If we talk more globally, among the challenges facing Europe now is protection from potential Russian aggression. How do you currently assess the preparation for the threats arising from Russia?
I think the problem, what really makes me very worried is we do. I mean, it's not enough in my personal opinion, but I'm not a security expert for genetic war. Yeah, I talk to a lot of people from that sphere. It could be more, but they say we have a development. But what I think is more worrying is that we do the right things, but we don't explain them. For instance, in Austria, we have a government that really shows clear to the people what they stand on the side of Ukraine. They support. They are very supportive, and they also find the right words. But they don't explain the big picture, and they don't invest money, a lot of money, in the whole of Europe to fight all these Russian narratives and these narratives from the old peace movement, which we have since the Cold War. And back then it was already manipulated by the KGB and infiltrated, financed partly. And it sounds so stupid because why do I care what happened 40 years ago when I was a baby? But it matters now because these people are still alive. They still have the same agenda. Some even have connections. GDR, you remember, they have this Russian connection. And they lobby and campaign against the rearmament of Europe. So we have a big fight that is not necessary if we would do something on the cognitive warfare level. I mean, for the money what one tank costs, how much can you do on the information level? A lot. It doesn't mean that we don't need the tanks, but we need to explain why we need all the weapons, and we don't do it enough. But in general, I think we go a little bit, at least, in the right direction.
Europe's frontier countries ready their hospitals for war. Political reports, wartime health planning is no longer hypothetical on NATO's eastern flank. How important do you think this preparation is?
Yeah, I think it's very important, but especially if it's on in the countries that are close to the Russian Federation, because the good situation that we have there, that people are much more aware what is going on. They have their history, they know their history. I mean, some in Hungary, they forgot about their history when we look at Mr. Orban. Not all of the citizens, but many, unfortunately. But if you take a look at the Baltic states, at Finland, and I think it's very good to be prepared and also to prepare on the cognitive level. And how can you protect yourself? What can civil society do? You remember the hedgehog placement to help that the tanks cannot reach you. All these little things that volunteers can do, also if they're not professional military. So I think this is very important. And the problem is, if we would do the same here, they call it warmongering. If we prepare for defending, for a potential situation to defend ourselves, and if you are prepared to defend yourself, then it's less likely that you have to do it, because the attacker knows, okay, it's going to be difficult because these people are prepared. But the problem is that the peace propaganda, I called it like that, it sounds strange, they rephrase it. They say, if you are prepared, if you prepare yourself for a war in that sense, you prepare to lead a war, to start a war. You are an aggressor. But we see, if we take a look at what is happening in Europe, Georgia, Chechnya, also in Moldova, and since 2014 in Ukraine, we see that Russia is still the aggressor. And there was only a small pause during the time of Yeltsin because they were just too weak. The imperialism never went away. And if we don't understand the Russian imperialism, then we will never be prepared.
You mentioned the narrative that the war started because of NATO's expansion to the eastern flank, and this narrative is very popular also in Western Europe. How can we debunk this fake now?
there are so many reasons we need to debunk it because it's a justification, which is not a justification, of course. Yeah, and this is terrible, especially for the victims of this war. Yeah, because it says, yeah, if you and we have a former president in our country who said during an interview, I don't think that Russia would have attacked Ukraine if they would be neutral. Yeah, but they were neutral in 2014, and now they are still. I mean, there's no NATO membership, at least, unfortunately, by the way. And we have the same. We have professors spreading this. We have people at universities, and this is extremely dangerous. And I would debunk it. I would clearly say, of course, Russia is afraid of NATO, but not because they are afraid to get attacked. They are just afraid that it's more difficult to attack them by themselves, their neighbors. Yeah? So they are, in the sense, afraid that NATO is an organization that makes their imperialism much more difficult. So this is why we need NATO in Europe. We don't need it because we are evil or aggressive. We need it because they are. Unfortunately, we have a situation like this. And you see Finland and Sweden, they had their reason. I mean, these are old democracies that decided to join a defensive bloc. And you also have to add that all the countries who are part of NATO, they became it voluntarily. They even put some pressure. They said, we wanted to be protected. We wanted to protect our independence from Moscow because we have our history. And that brings me again to the history of Russian imperialism. Who knows about the situation of Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, what happened even when the Soviet Union divided? There were people killed. They think that Gorbachev was such a nice peace-loving guy, but also even under his rule, it was not very nice for the nations when they want to become independent, also in the Caucasus and in other countries. So, yeah, I think it's extremely important to debunk that claim because it does not justify anything. There was never any serious threat for Russia, no plan from NATO to attack Russia. It's a defensive organization, and I mean, Hungary is part of NATO. All these Russian friends, all these Russian presidents, pro-Russian presidents within NATO were also part of NATO. And even Russia said in 2004, I think, yeah, they can join wherever they want. And suddenly you change your opinion. I mean, what's that? But the problem is, in this discussion is we have so many people in the West who hate NATO. And especially in neutral Austria, we demonized NATO. It doesn't matter if we become a member or not. But if you demonize something, then it's very easy to convince you, look, the Russians were afraid because evil NATO came closer. Yeah, so this is how it works. And there's a lot of work to explain that. And we have also people like John Mearsheimer or Jeffrey Sachs, academics. They travel around the world. They are always invited in the media, in the European Parliament, at universities even. And they spread this narrative. And this makes me much more worried than an anonymous troll because people believe in them. And that's they have another reach.
One of the big threats to the European Union right now is the spread of far-right parties. This applies, first of all, to Eastern Europe, Poland, Romania, Slovakia, Hungary, but it's also a challenge for Western territories such as France. To what extent is this fact related to Russia?
Yeah, there are several things to keep in mind here. The far right, first of all, they have the ideology. I mean, this is why I think these old left-wingers who are still pro-Moscow, they are so stupid, because Russia has nothing to do with left ideas. It's an ultra-conservative, authoritarian, fascist regime. Yeah, so it's and this is, of course, it's attractive for a lot of far-right parties. Yeah, so they have their good reasons to be pro-Kremlin, yeah, to see, yeah, this is a strong leader. They have all these cliches, these stereotypical views. And of course, there is a natural alliance between Russia and the Western European far right. It's the EU skepticism, because EU skepticism is just another word for anti-EU hatred. So they campaign very strong against the European Union. And this is beneficial for Russia, because the more we are divided, the more we are weak, the more we do not speak with a common voice in foreign policy, the more it benefits Moscow. If for sanctions, for instance. Yeah, and then we have the collaboration, because when they want to split Europe, they have their own agenda. They have these conspiracy theories thinking, and they like disinformation. So I think they are natural allies, and there's nothing we can do about it. I'm more worried about all the others in the centrist area and the left-wingers who still believe in the old tales from the Cold War, which, by the way, were also wrong back then. There were Western people, Western leftists, who traveled to the Soviet Union, and they came back completely disappointed. It was nothing at all like they expected. The same happened when they traveled to China. There were a lot of Maoists, and for me, it's completely non-understandable how they can still have these pro-Moscow views so many years later. And after all we learned, especially, in 2014, I thought if the left would understand how strong aligned the Kremlin is with the far right, then they would change their mind. But now everybody knows, and they still didn't change their mind. So it's very disappointing. It's very strange. We have a very much more difficult and challenging situation than during the Cold War, because we have so many factions who are pro-Russian and anti-Western. So we have almost nobody defending, because we are so much in a kind of a self-hate, very critical about our own society, which is a good thing in general, but they exploit it to weaken us. They say the West is always to blame, the West is always to fail. And the far left and the far right, they have different arguments in this. And what they hate is they hate the European Union, they hate NATO, they hate the alliance of the transatlantic relationship, everything that we had last year stronger than before.
I also want to talk about another threat to Europe. These are so-called good Russians. They call themselves liberals, opposition, anti-Putinists, but they are not. At least that's how it seems from the point of view of Ukraine. After all, most of them did nothing to end the war. How big is their popularity in Europe now?
Yeah, this is a very challenging thing. I posted just 1 hour ago, I posted Westerners will never learn, because I read an article in Ukrainska Pravda about the young Navalnaya, and she was invited to some European youth event, and the Ukrainian delegation left the room. And I understand why, because we have, they are just not clear in their support for Ukraine. I mean, if you don't support delivery of weapons, and if you don't support sanctions, and if you play the victim card in this situation, then for me it's completely understandable that the Ukrainians are very skeptical, because I'm also very skeptical. Just recently I saw that they have this rhetorics, and I mean, it sounds very provocative, but I think for me it sounds a little bit like, yeah, we are against Putin, but when Putin is gone, we can be again Ruski Mir. Yeah? But the Ukrainians don't want to be Ruski Mir. They want to be independent. Yeah? And the Russians, they should just leave them alone. And this is something that most of them don't understand. I mean, there is Kasparov, but every time when I saw also when a Russian dares to mention these imperialistic views by the so-called Russian opposition, then he will get also very much attacked by them. Yeah? So even Ukrainians started to protect Kasparov back then, when he said that. So everything Karamurza, all these disappointing events, and also in Germany, they go to march. They say, yeah, we are against the regime, and so, but it's. when they discuss the Russian corruption, yeah, good that we have the corruption at the moment. So their army is less efficient. Yeah, I don't want to fight Russian corruption now. We need to push Russia out of Ukraine. This is the most important task. So I see a lot of disappointments, and I also remember what Navalny said about the sandwich, that Ukraine is not a sandwich that you give to somebody and take back. So they have this, many or most of them have this mindset, and I'm very critical about it and disappointed that the Westerners, they have this black and white thinking. Even the people who understand Putin, not good. Okay, you understand 50%, but you cannot also trust everybody automatically. Only the persons against Putin. I would never say that they are the same like Girkin, yeah, because Girkin is also, so of course, yeah, it would be a different situation, but I'm absolutely not satisfied. I totally understand your concern.
It's complicated, but very important. Dietmar, thank you for this conversation.
Thanks for having me again.
And thank you to all of our viewers. If this conversation was useful for you, please like and share this video, and see you.